Arnold Schwarzenegger in True Lies, starring Jamie Lee Curtis.
She did a great job, the way she danced and the way she kind of acted clumsy.
There are moments in cinema that stop time. Moments where the entire audience collectively holds their breath, where popcorn goes uneaten and drinks go unsipped, because what's unfolding on screen demands every single ounce of attention. Jamie Lee Curtis has given audiences more than a few of those moments across her remarkable career, but none quite so jaw-dropping, so unexpectedly bold, and so genuinely unforgettable as what she delivered in the 1994 action blockbuster, True Lies. Now, you might think you know this film. You might think you've seen everything there is to see. But here's the truth, what happened behind the camera is every bit as wild, surprising, and scandalous as what made it onto the screen. From a dance sequence that started as pure Hollywood choreography and ended in something far more real and raw, to a stunt so dangerous that it could have ended very differently, to behind-the-scenes chaos that would make your head spin, the story of True Lies is one of the most extraordinary untold sagas in modern Hollywood history. So settle in, because we're about to pull back the curtain on one of the most talked-about performances ever put to film, and trust us, even if you've seen this movie a dozen times, there are things you absolutely did not know. By the end of this video, you will never look at Jamie Lee Curtis, Arnold Schwarzenegger, or director James Cameron quite the same way again. To truly appreciate what Jamie Lee Curtis accomplished in True Lies, you have to understand the world the film was born into. It was the early 1990s. Action movies were dominating the box office. Arnold Schwarzenegger was the undisputed king of the genre, the man who had given audiences the Terminator, Predator, and Total Recall. He was a walking, talking, bulletproof force of nature, and every film he touched turned to gold. So when James Cameron, the visionary director who had already delivered Aliens and Terminator 2, Judgment Day, announced he was teaming up with Schwarzenegger again, Hollywood paid attention. But nobody was quite prepared for what Cameron had in mind. Rather than a straight action film, Cameron wanted something more layered. He wanted comedy woven into the chaos. He wanted real human drama beneath the explosions. And most importantly, he wanted a female lead who wasn't simply a prop or damsel. He wanted a woman who could anchor the entire emotional heart of the film. That woman was Jamie Lee Curtis. At the time, casting Curtis raised a few eyebrows. She was widely respected and genuinely beloved. Her horror work in Halloween had made her a cultural icon, and she had proven her dramatic chops in films like Trading Places. But a big-budget action blockbuster alongside the world's biggest action star? That was uncharted territory. What Cameron saw in her, however, was something that went far beyond box office math. He saw authenticity. He saw intelligence. He saw a performer capable of taking an audience from laughter to heartbreak to absolute astonishment within a single scene. And he was right. Let's talk about the scene. If you've seen True Lies, and statistically speaking, there's a very good chance you have, given that the film grossed over $378 million worldwide against a production budget of around $150 million, then you know exactly which scene we're talking about before we even describe it. Helen, the character Curtis plays, believes she has been recruited by a mysterious government agency. She has been told she must seduce a man, play a role, become someone else entirely for one night. What she doesn't know, in one of the film's most deliciously absurd twists, is that the man she's been asked to seduce is her own husband, Harry, played by Schwarzenegger, who has orchestrated the entire situation to inject some excitement back into their marriage. And so Helen, nervous and trembling and completely out of her depth, enters a darkened hotel room. And then the music begins. What follows is one of the most talked-about scenes in 1990 cinema. Curtis, dressed in a black slip, begins to dance. Slowly at first, then with growing confidence. She moves around the room with the energy of someone who is terrified and exhilarated in equal measure, because that's exactly what her character is feeling. The performance is electric. It is vulnerable and bold simultaneously, which is an almost impossible combination to pull off, and yet Curtis does it with breathtaking ease. Now here's where the story gets genuinely fascinating. The dance sequence required weeks of preparation. Curtis worked with choreographers, practiced her movement, and carefully constructed every moment of Helen's journey from nervous uncertainty to something approaching genuine confidence. The scene was meticulously planned because it had to be. The lighting, the camera angles, the emotional arc of the performance all needed to align perfectly. But here's something that most people don't know about that famous scene. During filming, Curtis slipped. While navigating the room in heels, moving around the furniture with all the careful precision that the choreography demanded, she lost her footing and went down. It happened in the middle of a take, completely unplanned, right in the middle of what was supposed to be a carefully controlled performance. Now, most directors would call cut. Most directors would reset the scene, check on their actress, and start over. James Cameron is not most directors. Cameron watched what happened next with the eye of someone who understood instinctively that some of the greatest moments in cinema are the ones that nobody planned. Because Curtis didn't panic. She didn't break character. She absorbed the fall with the same nervous energy that Helen would have absorbed it, kept her composure, and continued. And Schwarzenegger, watching from across the room, his face momentarily registering genuine surprise, played along with equal instinct. His brief, real reaction of startled amusement became part of the scene itself. Cameron kept the footage. Of course he did. What's particularly interesting is the slight contradiction in the stories that emerged over time. Some accounts suggest the slip was entirely accidental and Cameron simply chose to use it. Others, including some comments from Curtis herself in later interviews, suggest the fall had been loosely incorporated into the plan, that Curtis had said she was willing to fall but didn't want to do it more than twice given the risk of twisting her ankle in heels. What both accounts agree on is this: whether the precise moment was planned or not, the authentic human reaction it generated was real, and that reality is exactly what makes the scene so electrifying to watch even decades later. There's a lesson buried in there about filmmaking, about performance, and about the kind of magic that happens when talented people trust each other enough to let the unexpected become the extraordinary. To understand why Curtis gave the performance she did, you have to understand who Jamie Lee Curtis is as a performer and as a person. She is someone who has never been interested in doing things the easy way. She is someone who has consistently chosen truth over comfort, vulnerability over protection, and genuine emotion over polished artifice. Curtis grew up inside Hollywood royalty. Her mother was Janet Leigh, whose own iconic scene in Psycho remains one of the most discussed moments in cinema history, and her father was Tony Curtis, one of the defining leading men of the Golden Age. She was born into a world of cameras and spotlights and the impossible pressure of expectation. And yet she carved her own path, defined herself on her own terms, and built a career that has now spanned more than 4 decades without ever losing the quality that makes audiences trust her completely: realness. When Cameron approached her about True Lies, Curtis was initially uncertain about whether the role was right for her. Helen Tasker, as written, could have been a passive character, the wife at home, the woman who doesn't know what her husband really does, the supporting player in someone else's adventure. Curtis was not interested in playing that version of the character. What she negotiated, through her conversations with Cameron, was a Helen who had her own journey, her own transformation, her own moments of genuine agency and power. The dance scene was central to that negotiation. It wasn't just a moment of spectacle. It was the pivot point of Helen's entire character arc, the moment where this ordinary suburban woman reaches inside herself and finds something unexpected. The fact that Curtis threw herself into it with such fearless commitment wasn't an accident. It was the result of an actress who understood exactly what her character needed and refused to deliver anything less. The dance sequence was not the only time Jamie Lee Curtis refused to take the safe route on True Lies. The film's production was, by any reasonable standard, extraordinarily dangerous. James Cameron has never been a director who does things by half measures, and True Lies was shot with a commitment to practical, real-world action that would make modern safety coordinators lose sleep. One of the film's most visually spectacular sequences involves Helen Tasker dangling from a helicopter high above open water. It is exactly as terrifying as it sounds. When the time came to film this sequence, the production had, naturally, arranged for a professional stunt double to handle the most dangerous elements. That is standard practice. That is the sensible, industry-approved approach. Curtis declined. She wanted to do the stunt herself. Not because she had anything to prove, not because she was reckless or cavalier about the risks, but because she believed that a stunt double would create a distance between the audience and the character that would undermine everything she had been building throughout the film. She wanted Helen's fear, Helen's exhilaration, Helen's survival to be genuinely felt, and for that, she argued, it needed to actually be her. Cameron pushed back, as any responsible director would. He raised the obvious safety concerns. He explained the risks. And Curtis, with characteristic directness, asked him a simple question: where would he be during the shoot? Cameron told her he intended to be hanging from the helicopter door himself in order to film her close-up. And Curtis looked at him and essentially said, if you're willing to do it, I'm willing to do it. It is worth pausing on that exchange for a moment, because it captures something essential about the atmosphere on the set of True Lies. This was a production led by a director who demanded absolute commitment from himself as well as from everyone around him, and populated by performers who rose to meet that standard. The result was extraordinary footage that could not have been replicated any other way. Curtis trained for weeks to prepare for the helicopter sequence. She conditioned herself physically, worked on her mental focus, and did everything possible to ensure she could perform under the extreme conditions the stunt required. When the day came, as the helicopter climbed and the wind tore past her and the ground fell away below, she held herself with the composure and precision of someone who had done the work. The sequence remains one of the most genuinely gripping moments in the film, and now you know exactly why. She completed it on her 36th birthday. Of course, True Lies was not a one-woman show, and the extraordinary circumstances that produced Curtis's performance were part of a larger tapestry of behind-the-scenes drama and creative ambition that deserve their own examination. James Cameron, famously, did not trust anyone else's jokes. The original screenplay's comedic elements were, in Cameron's estimation, simply not good enough. So he rewrote them. All of them. The man who had built his reputation on science fiction intensity and apocalyptic action sat down and crafted a new comedic architecture for the film from the ground up. Of all the jokes in the original script, only 2 survived into the final cut. One of them was Schwarzenegger's legendary line, delivered just before firing a missile with a villain attached to it, "You're fired." The rest of the humor you remember from True Lies came from Cameron himself or from the improvisational instincts of his cast. Tom Arnold, who plays Harry Tasker's wisecracking partner Albert Gibson, was nearly not in the film at all. Studio executives at 20th Century Fox were deeply uncomfortable with Arnold's casting. He was going through an extraordinarily public and messy divorce from comedian Roseanne Barr at the time, and the studio feared that his tabloid notoriety would damage the film's image. Cameron disagreed emphatically. He saw in Arnold a comedic timing and an improvisational fearlessness that he believed would be the perfect counterweight to Schwarzenegger's straight-faced intensity. Cameron fought for Arnold's casting to the point of threatening to walk away from the entire project if the studio refused. The studio, faced with the prospect of losing their director, relented. One of the film's most quoted lines came directly from Arnold's real life. In a scene where his character confides about his painful divorce, he delivers the line about his wife taking the ice cube trays from the freezer. That detail wasn't invented by a screenwriter. Arnold had told Cameron, during casual conversation, that Barr had taken everything in their split and that the ice cube trays, somehow, stuck in his memory as the detail that crystallized the whole humiliating experience. Cameron heard it, recognized its perfect tragicomic specificity, and put it in the film. Art imitating life, wearing the thinnest possible disguise. Arnold Schwarzenegger, meanwhile, spent 6 months learning the tango for a single scene. He studied under professional instructors, drew inspiration from Al Pacino's performance in Scent of a Woman, and practiced with a discipline that matched anything he brought to his physical training. The result was a sequence that showed audiences a completely different side of the world's biggest action star, graceful, charming, and surprisingly light on his feet.